with more on the story. Simon, great to see you. So, are we bracing for another day of protests, day 7 of these protests in the US?
I think without question, Mbakili, and there's a very simple reason for that. There is no one at the White House, particularly not the President of the United States, actively telling people to cool their passions and stay at home. We did not hear one word from President Trump publicly yesterday. It looks as though today he's going to leave it to his press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany, to do the talking at the White House. The only communication channel that the president is currently using with the American people is his Twitter feed. And most of the messages that he puts out on that Twitter feed, his critics contend, are designed to inflame the situation and foment more unrest. Within the last hour or so, he's been attacking the man he refers to as Sleepy Joe, the former Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden, for helping to bail out some of the activists who were arrested in Minneapolis early during these protests. He says that Sleepy Joe Biden's people are so radical left that they are working to get the anarchists out of jail and probably more. An inference there that in some fashion the Democrats are in cahoots with anarchists to try and bring mayhem to the streets of 75 cities all over the United States. Joe is clueless, but they will be the real power, not Joe, tweeted the president an hour ago. In earlier tweets, he also once again appears to have given the green light to people to attack journalists on the streets by insisting that the lamestream news media is doing everything within their power to foment hatred and anarchy. Now, this is utterly unusual, indeed uniquely unusual in the United States. The United States is, of course, no stranger to protests, to riots, and in some cities to looting. But every previous president of the United States would by now have made a televised address to the nation, urging the nation to calm down, to take a breath, suggesting that the president understands why people are so angry. This president instead is hunkered down at the White House. On Friday night, he was quite literally moved into a bunker beneath the building by the Secret Service. So worried were they that demonstrators were going to pierce the perimeter of the White House and breach its security fence. And he's choosing to articulate his message through Twitter. It's an absolutely extraordinary situation.
Just based then on the tone of those tweets, Simon, and words like anarchists being used by the US president, you have to wonder if him speaking publicly would do anything then to quell the anger on the streets, because, as you're saying, he's choosing to highlight the people who've been protesting and causing damage to property and the like. But when you hear from the black protesters and some of the other minority demonstrators, they're saying that that is part of their core frustration, that whenever things such as this happen, there is always a sense that those in leadership and others refuse to acknowledge the systemic racism and abuse of black suspects, opting instead to address looting and that sort of thing.
Yeah, look, I mean, the thing is that these protests are not monolithic in nature. Of course, the protests in Minneapolis were kicked off by that appalling killing of George Floyd by those police officers who sought to arrest him a week ago on a minor charge of forgery. So clearly in Minneapolis, that was the driving force for these protests. But this country is now a country of seething rage over a whole variety of different issues. We're at the beginning of a long, hot summer here in the United States. There are 40 million people here now without work. They don't have jobs to go to. You've got a country that has been locked down for the last 11 or 12 weeks. People are exercising their opportunity now to get out and get on the streets and join these protests. And much as President Trump would like to brand them all anarchists, Antifa, he says, a movement of loosely affiliated anti-fascist groups that he now claims he's about to designate a terrorist organization. There's no opportunity in US law for him to do that, by the way. These protests are about a paroxysm of anger in the United States, a demand for change, a demand for the issue that Black Lives Matter has championed over the last 6 and 7 years finally to be addressed in the country. And at the White House, those protesters last night, some of whom were absolutely engaged in looting, even in the northern suburbs of Washington, D.C., where people are suddenly very nervous because looters and protesters have descended on areas of mostly white privilege in northwest Washington, D.C. A president who really, as you said, Tembakili, has no capacity now to convey a message of tranquility and responsibility. And that is what makes this such an incredibly dangerous cocktail, not just tonight, but potentially for many, many nights to come.
Simon Marks, live for us in Washington. We'll be live with you again as soon as we begin to see movement on those protests sparked by the death of a black man, George Floyd, at the hands of police.